So now I'm trying to build a movement, and construct something on. So it's no longer physical things. I think it's more or less we're dealing with ideas now, and how to manifest ideas, how to take an idea and turn it into something real, so people who can accept it as their own, and organize and make a concept, make an idea become a physical reality, material reality in people's lives, and I think if we can do that, and bring these ideas together, bring people together to understand the power of an idea, you just look at the United States government in terms of how he came up with the idea of manifest destiny, you know what I'm saying, and turned manifest destiny into an imperial country that it is today, an empire that it is today. You see, so I think that is the idea is power if you know how to make people to come together and understand the power of an idea. The question of, for instance, the idea of freedom and liberation, is very powerful. It scares a lot of people. When you get a lot of people start talking about freedom and liberation as an idea, it scares a lot of people who are in power and who are now able to develop ideas. You know what I'm saying, and disseminate those ideas, and capable of getting people to adhere to those ideas via, in today's time, the media, as a mechanism of exchange of ideas. So we don't have any control of any media at this point in time. So we use our little pocket change for our little zines and our little publications and, and our writings and so forth and so on to try to get the idea across, right? And change some people's thinking in terms of, hey, the level that we're thinking right now, we can think on another level and on a higher level, if we so choose to do so. And so by offering new ideas and getting people to start thinking with new ideas, the greater possibility that then they will therefore act, And why I say that? Because thought precedes action. You got to think about a thing before you proceed to act upon a thing. So therefore, how you think is a determining factor of how you're going to act. All right? So if we have people thinking in a particular way, then the greater possibility they will act in conformity to those ideas, to those thoughts. All right? So
you were talking about before about constructing things and then constructing and building a movement based on ideas.
Yeah.
And let's talk about building the Jericho movement, and maybe if you could give a history of the Jericho movement, since it was basically your brainchild.
No, I won't say that,
Okay.
but I contributed to an idea that was already in existence. I'm gonna give you a whole history of when I was returned back to San Quentin. Right, 1975, after getting convicted, May 19th, 1975, I returned back to San Quentin, and they put me back in the Adjustment Center, all right? And I was on the first floor, Adjustment Center with San Quentin 6, and I had Rochelle McGee on the right side of me, and I had Charlie Manson on the left side of me, right? And Rochelle received a letter from Yuri Kochiyama. At the time, she was a part of the National Committee in Defense of Political Prisoners, right? I was in, I think I was in 1975, 1976. And the letter talked about a demonstration or something that was organizing an anniversary of Malcolm X and so forth and so on, and the issues of Malcolm having once brought the question of human rights to the United Nations and so forth. So Rochelle and I got into a conversation about this. Because first he asked me, he said, do I know anybody out of New York, right, organization for because he knew I just got back from New York. I told him, yeah, man, I know, he said, well, do you know these people here? And Yuri Kochiyama. I said, yeah, I know Yuri. Yuri's good people, right? So he gave me the thing, and I read it, I gave it back to him, we had a discussion about it. So at the end of our discussion, we talked about whether, there needs to be a human rights question or issue raised about political prisoners. And I said, yeah, Rochelle, you're right, you know. He said, maybe we should write something about that. So he said, you write something about that, let me see. He said, I want you to, he said, respond to this pamphlet, you know, dealing with this issue.
And like, what do you think about the
Yeah,
pamphlet?
yeah.
Have possibilities for a campaign?
Right. So I wrote something, I showed it to him. He said, hey man, I really like this, you know, but you know what, you need to break this into like to the outline in terms of, you know, the idea of what you're talking about, but how can it be implemented? So the following night, stayed up all night and I wrote out an outline. So what we did, we smuggled it up to the second floor. The second floor, Geronimo and Russell Little of SLA. They was up on the second floor of the Adjustment Center. So we sent it up to them and they liked it and approved it, okay? But Geronimo sent back where he said, well, listen, what you should do is develop this so it can be sent to organizations in the Bay Area. So we sent the copy to New York, and then I started distributing it to organizations in the Bay Area, but didn't get any responses. So eventually I was released from the Adjustment Center. I was put in an area called Max B, which is still a segregated area. It wasn't general population in San Quentin. It was called Max B, where they had the Chicanos and the Aryan Brotherhood, whites, right, on one side, and they have the blacks and the Mexican Mafia, another group on the other side, not Mexican Mafia, Nostra Familia or something like that on the other side, right? Because there's this gang warfare was going on in the prison at that time. And so I ran into this guy, white guy, they call him Commie Mike, right? Some call him Iron Mike, somebody call him Commie Mike, right? So I met him, and then he told me about an organization in San Francisco called UPU, United Prisoners Union. And it was originally headed by a guy by the name of Popeye Jackson. Now Popeye had just got killed, assassinated, right, in San Francisco due to internalizing struggles between prison support groups in the Bay Area, all right? It was basically between a group allegedly called Tribal Thumb and UPU, right? So he was killed. And so they was basically leaderless. So Mike said, well, listen, man, I know the project that you want to put together, so forth and so on. Send it to UPU. I'll write them, let them know that that I asked for you to do that. All right. So I sent it to UPU, and they liked it. They said, man, this is pretty good. I think we can work on this. Okay. And so they came to visit me. We discussed the dynamics of it. And then I contacted Sundiata Akoli. He was in New Jersey at the time. And I said, listen, I need for you to represent the East Coast. He agreed. So then we put out a letter introducing Prisoners United Nations campaign. And that first letter that we sent to prisoners on the UPU's mailing list received a response that was tremendous. Tremendous response from prisoners across the country. All right. And then
Political prisoners.
No, prisoners in general, and political prisoners. Originally we sent it to the incarcerated BPP, BLA members, so forth across the country, and then they, distributed it. All right, we had our own little network, all right, and distributed it inside the institutions across the country, and we see hundreds of responses. People saying, yeah, we support this. We're gonna get down with this here. All right. It had been growing so big that UPU couldn't handle it. As a collective, we couldn't handle it. So then we introduced it to PFOC, Prairie Fire Organizing Committee. And Prairie Fire said, well, yeah, we'd like to support this and get involved with this project. And so we started working on it and developed a pamphlet. It was called Privileged Prisoners, Revolutionary Solidarity Movement, excuse me. And put that together, didn't come off too well, right? And then somebody from PFOC brought an attorney by the name of Catherine Burke. She worked for Amnesty International at the time. And Catherine, it was suggested that instead of just, because originally it was just going to be a signature petition, right, to be introduced to the United Nations, right? But the idea came up, well, why don't we just submit a document to a special subcommission, Geneva subcommission? So I said, well, I don't know how to do that. But he said, we'll find someone. And they found Catherine Burke. So Catherine comes from Amnesty International, humanitarian movement, so forth and so on. But she ain't know nothing about this political stuff, this domestic, revolutionary political stuff. So I'm teaching her about this history of struggle, and she's teaching me about international law, all right? And so we worked to begin formulating a petition to be submitted. And we started an entire campaign, West Coast and East Coast. Now, the dynamics between the two was different. On the West Coast, most of the individuals that was involved in this were progressive revolutionary white people, right? On the East Coast, most people was involved in it was revolutionary nationalists and black folks, right? Not RNA, RNA people, right? RNA, African People's Party, and a few other organizations, all right? Black Panther Party members, former Black Panther Party members, so forth. Okay. So as they're developing support base for it on the East Coast, under the leadership of Sundiata, and I'm developing on the West Coast, we find two different dynamics being developed. And it almost scuttled the whole entire campaign because I sent a progressive PFOC by a woman named China Browski to New York to discuss the campaign. And when she did, she went to PFOC members in New York who had not had a relationship with the black movement in New York at that time. So it was a major problem, okay? Racism and a relationship between the groups, basically. So, and nevertheless, I continued to push forward the campaign. Catherine went to Geneva. She submitted the first document ever submitted dealing with the questions of U.S. political prisoners, right, based upon this campaign. Was submitted in Geneva. She gave a presentation. She had an enthusiastic response from people internationally. Why? Because it's a question of human rights and how the United States was using human rights as a weapon against other countries, but failed to discuss the issues of human rights violations within the borders of North America, okay, within the United States. So therefore, it was an issue that was a leverage and possibly a bargaining chip for these other organizations and groups on the international. So they wanted to know more, get more information about it. And at the same time, I organized the first Black August demonstration in front of San Quentin. That was August 21st, 1977, right? So it was all a process that was going on at that time. And I also, we put together a pamphlet called, what was the name of it? Prisoners Amnesty Movement, okay? And so I submitted that document, and it was well received across the country. 1977, September 19th, I was paroled from California, right? Brought back to New York to begin this sentence. And so it was a whole struggle about what happened when I was in California, what was going on here in New York. And the group, Black Human Rights Coalition, I believe was the name of it, or Black Coalition for Human Rights, something of that nature, right? National Black Human Rights Coalition, right? Had got Lennox Hines, another attorney, to support them on the issues of political prisoners and human rights issue. And then what happened was that he moved in a direction divorced from where I was moving with Catherine and Burke. And so it's somewhat autonomous, but building on the same kind of issue, all right? And he was able to get the international jurors to tour the United States. The international jurors toured the United States and they visited several political prisoners, and they determined that yes, indeed, the United States does have political prisoners. A political prison does exist in the United States, all right? He put out a book called The Illusion of Justice by Lennox Hines, and we should discuss that matter. Okay. So it was an entire campaign. For the most part, it was successful in as much as the issue was brought into the international arena, okay? And it was the first document that was presented to the United Nations, right? It was a recorded document of the United Nations. So in that instance, it was successful. And then there's another presentation that was made, okay? Then there was a law in terms of the movement in general, okay, because of splits, fractionalism, sectarianism, the whole bit that goes on, and all right. And there is a general law. I continue to write on the subject, you know, and to write articles and try to build support for it. And then I got involved with dealing with the case itself, you know, dealing with my appeals. I mentioned earlier about, you know, 81, filing the petition and so forth to the courts for an appeal. However, the Republic of New Africa used to have demonstrations, annual demonstrations in front of the White House called Jericho, right? Calling for amnesty for political prisoners. But then they stopped doing that for whatever reasons.
They've done this since, do you remember when the first one was?
I believe the first one was in the late 70s, going into mid 80s, if I remember, okay?
And they organized who were the people that came?
It was our Republic of New Africa, right? Imari Obadeli, who was, I think at the time was the president of the Republic of New Africa, and Ahmed Obafemi, Chokwe Lumumba, who are now part of NAPO, were involved in this process. But, you know, splits in RNA and the NAPO, you know, came into existence, and so they had other projects to deal with, and then they did not mess with this anymore. So it came a point in time where, you know, I felt there was a need to resurrect that, right? And this was after I had put together, was contributed to the development of the New African Liberation Front, all right? And so I wrote a letter to Herman Ferguson, and I requested that, you know, we try to rebuild or reestablish the Jericho, okay? And so I put out a call, basically a leaflet, a flyer, right? Making a call for Jericho 1998. And it was enthusiastically supported, both inside and outside of prisons across the country. Herman said he couldn't do it by himself, so he asked Sophia Bukhari to assist in this effort. And so she and he and I had a visit. I was over in Eastern. We had a visit and we discussed how to develop the project, the Jericho March, right, to the White House in 1998. And the campaign evolved. It was supported across the country. For the most part, it was successful in terms of a march. You know, we had representatives from all the way from Hawaii, you know, from Puerto Rico to Hawaii to participate in that. We had something like 5,000 to 8,000 people, you know, I don't remember the total count, to attend and participate in that. And it's the first march at the White House that had that many people involved talking about amnesty for political prisoners. And then afterwards, we decided, well, it's necessary to move forward and continue in this initiative. And so we evolved into Jericho Amnesty Movement. We came out with an organizing manual and just try to set up structure and the whole bit. So basically, from 1976 to 77 to the present, I've been engaging in developing the question of human rights and the issues of political prisoners in the United States. You know, something that they continue to refute and deny the existence of political prisoners. You know, and it's ridiculous. You know, how can, you know, every nation, every government, you know, has individuals who are quote unquote dissidents, right? And have been incarcerated because of their political beliefs or their activities in regards to political, you know, political work, so forth and so on, and be incarcerated. So how can the United States, you know, deny, you know, that they have dissidents? Of course the United States have dissidents. You know what I'm saying? So, so it's ridiculous for them to even, you know, tell the world, no, we don't have dissidents, or tell the world we don't have political prisoners. You know, the UN campaign, Rich UN campaign, give you an example of what I'm talking about. At that time, Andrew Young was the UN ambassador, the United States UN ambassador, all right? And he is making a visit to Paris, France. So I knew about the visit coming up, and someone had brought information to me that could be a particular reporter there who supported the UN campaign. I said, do you want me to tell him anything? I said, yeah. Tell that person to ask Andrew Young at the event that he's supposed to be attending, does political prisoners exist in the United States, right? So the reporter asked the question. He answered, yes, probably thousands, was his answer, right? The United States went bonkers, bonkers. He lost his job because of that statement. He was kicked out of the United Nations as the United States representative. That's right, because of that statement. So that's one of the issues that was raised in regards to the question of human rights with Andrew Young. You know, and I'm still trying to get him to, again, you know, issue and argue or raise the question of political prisoners in the United States. Another development during that campaign, or during that effort, was I was trying to get a prisoners exchange, you know, between the United States and Cuba. And what happened was that people were going over to Cuba for I think the Vice-Ramos Brigade, right? And so they're raising the question of political prisoners over there. So I said, well, they asked me, said, well, is there anything we'd like to be raised over there about this matter? And I said, yeah, they're asking for a prisoner exchange. You know, I said, I know they got some CIA operatives over there, and the United States would like to get back. And so the question was raised with the CCP, and they were interested. But for me to sell it here, right, to get the issues raised here in the United States, to a level where people can really say, hey, this is a possibility, I need more. So I sent word back, and I said, well, ask Comrade Fidel, right, to make a statement in this regards. 1977, People's Assembly, Monaco People's Assembly in Cuba, Fidel Castro made a statement that he's willing to make an exchange between black prisoners in the United States with prisoners in Cuba. Public statement. Yuri sent me a copy of the statement. All right? I was elated. I was ecstatic. I was jumping for joy in the cell. And therefore, I contacted several people in regards to this matter who I knew had relationships with the United Nations and, you know, lawyers, right? And I told them, well, listen, the next thing for us to do is to go to the State Department and try to move on this. Unfortunately, the people in the United States failed to take the necessary steps to make the exchange happen. They failed to do it, all right? Which is, in my opinion, was a betrayal, right? And I know the individuals, but I don't want to mention their names. I feel it was a betrayal. However, several months later, an exchange was in fact made between Cuban refugees who were incarcerated in the United States and CIA operatives in Cuba. An exchange was in fact made. Right, that was in 1977. That's right. So these are what I consider missed opportunities, you know, and it indicates the weakness in general, quote, movement, right? And it's anticipated or it's hoped that Jericho amnesty movement will be able to resurrect and fulfill their obligation and responsibilities to rebuild the capacity to ensure that the issues of political prisoners is not off the political spectrum or the political map, and that is raised to a level into a national debate that has to be rectified, particularly in regards to counterintelligence program and what happened with that. Now, the reason why I'm offering that as a mythology or a means to deal with this discussion, deal with this issue, is because it has already been established by the United States Senate, particularly the Senate Church Committee, determined in 1974 and 1975 that the Federal Bureau of Investigation activities under the auspices of Cointelpro, Counterintelligence Program, was unconstitutional. That their activities, Cointelpro, was illegal. Right? The Senate made that judgment, made that decision, reported that. Okay. However, the Senate Church Committee failed to offer remedy and redress for those who were victims of Cointelpro. All right. So while the United States has determined that the activities during that period of time, where the Black Panther Party was a target of Cointelpro, and determined that the activities of the FBI was illegal and unconstitutional at that time, they have not established no remedies, right? They have established no redress for those who were victimized. All right. So now that's unfinished business. Okay. And so my hope is that at some point in time when Jericho is strong enough and the issue has become part of the national debate of the question of the existence of political prisoners in the United States, that we'll be able to pursue redress, the greater probability of amnesty for all those who were victims who can prove, according to documentation, that they were victims of Cointelpro. One particular individual, and I'm more concerned about than anyone else, that's our dear brother Mumia Abu Jamal on death row, all right, who at the age of 15 was a target of Cointelpro when he was a member of the Black Panther Party. You know, it's established, recorded, documented information, and we should be able to bring that to Congress, bring that to the Senate, and say, listen, we have some unfinished business pertaining to this issue, and we should have a hearing. So we've asked Congressional Black Caucus to convene hearings on Cointelpro to determine whether or not there are victims who are still languishing in prison 30 years later and need to find some means to have these people released from prison. So hopefully that would be at some point in time a very important work for Jericho to concentrate towards in terms of gaining the release of political prisoners.
How does the discussion about Cointelpro and the acts of the counterintelligence program, how can it fit within a human rights campaign?
How can it fit in a human rights campaign?
Yeah.
I think one of the ways that we have to argue it or raise the issues in terms of his history. Okay, I mean you cannot take away from how he came into existence. Okay, the reason why he came into existence. So when we look at the history of the civil rights movement and how it evolved into, quote, Black Power movement or the Black Liberation movement, right, in terms of history of this country, right, and how the FBI and the government responded to that, right, that in itself determines the human rights issue, okay, because these movements was only demanding human rights, right? Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X says, the questions of we're struggling for is not civil rights, it's human rights, right? Why should we, the demands that we are requesting and asking of this government, right? Why are they confined to the civil code of the social order? Why are they not recognized as inalienable rights as being human beings? Now that's granted to all other people. You see what I'm saying? So now if you recognize as being an inalienable right, a right that it should be given to all human beings, you know, we're talking about housing, employment, education, you know, and those kind of issues that we was raising at that particular time and fighting for, right? When we were talking about, you know, desegregation and so forth and so on, as being human right issues, then naturally are continuing to deal with the persons or deal with the questions of persons who have been incarcerated for fighting for these issues continue to the same line as being a human right question. All right? So, Cointelpro, essentially, yeah, I see you smiling. Cointelpro was essentially a prohibition or trying to limit the dispensing of that which is supposed to be granted to individuals, no matter of creed, color, belief, whatever. You see what I'm saying? Supposed to be human rights. All right? And so therefore, by it being supposed to be or should be human rights, we continue to argue that the question of political prisoners in the United States is an issue of human rights. You know, it's not a civil matter. And it comes out the fold of civil matters. It's an international issue. You know, it's an issue that affects all peoples everywhere. Now, if we're going to look at the United States as being a representative of the international police, right? That it governs in terms of its empire, in terms of what goes on, and determines what are human rights in other parts of the world, right? Particularly in terms of dissidents in other parts of the world, and argues that those issues are human rights issues in other parts of the world. How can you deny that same validating matter or issue here in the United States within its own borders? If you do, there'll be hypocrisy, the height of hypocrisy. All right? And we already know that, right? Right? Didn't Malcolm say that that democracy is nothing but plain hypocrisy? You know. So I mean, we know that. So then we have to unveil, you know, the covers. You know what I'm saying? So into the light of day, and let people know that this is a human rights issue. Right, and it does not or cannot be confined to the domestic and civil questions of you know, of the United States, and that we need to gain the support of the people throughout the world who are concerned about human rights to demand that the question of political prisoners is raised on the national debate, and that the United States deal with this issue as they have claimed and argued about the issues in other parts of the world, you know.
Is Cointelpro dead now, though? I mean, is it something that's had a beginning and had an end?
Only in name, not in practice, all right? Only in name. The United States continue to implement the same type of surveillance, provocateurism, infiltration, that it always just new names, and new methods from which they operate, but the same principles applies, you know, in trying to naturally hold down dissent, you know, to banish dissent.
What are some of the lessons that you've taken from the Puerto Rican campaign, amnesty campaign, and the clemency that was given to
I can appreciate the success. And I've seen in my years in prison, I've seen twice that Puerto Ricans have been released from prison, you know, due to amnesty. You know, with the Lolita Lebron and yeah, right, and then also now with Carmen and the recent group, okay. But I think one thing that we have to take in consideration is that there's a clear demarcation in terms of their relationship to the United States. There's a clear understanding, historical demarcation that has been drawn. Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States, right? They call it a Commonwealth, right? But the history of it, in terms of the United States relationship to Puerto Rico, has always been an antagonistic one, all right? So, in understanding that history itself, the people are recognizing that there's a clear line of division between their relationship, their understanding of them as being a colony, and their relationship to the United States. So anyone who engaged in struggle and incarcerated, it's easy for the people of Puerto Rico to recognize them as having been incarcerated for political ideas, goals, and objectives. That same type of relationship does not exist consciously between black people and the United States. You see? So therefore, the ability to discuss the issue and raise the issue in the black community has to take a different political foundation, political means to address that matter, all right? And because of the divisions, particularly class divisions amongst black folks in this country, we have not been able to raise it to a national level, whereas in Puerto Rico was able to raise to a national level. Now that's one. Two, the United States recognized Puerto Rico as having something viable and necessary for the United States operations. As an example, Vieques, all right, and being able to use that part of the island for military training, all right? So that's a leverage that they was able to use in terms of trying to deal with the question of political prisoners in the United States, right? So they was able to get the governor of Puerto Rico and the other legislative representatives there to raise that question, and also representatives of the United States to raise that questions with the United States government in terms of, well, you're dealing with the Vieques and using it as a military operations and a bombing training and so forth and so on. Right now, people are discussing with this issue. Well, then we can also put on the table the question of Puerto Rican political prisoners to be negotiated in terms of their release. You see what I'm saying? So that's another dynamic they was able to use, okay, as a bargaining chip on this matter. All right, we don't have that.
We don't have a bargaining chip?
Well, in terms of, we don't have a bargaining chip like that. We don't have a movement that's organized the ways that we can even, to any degree, be able to threaten the United States and saying, well, if you don't do this, we'll do that. You see what I'm saying? We're not organized in that capacity and able to raise the question of political prisoners and on a level where it be recognized as an issue that the United States have to negotiate. He has to bring to the table. You see?
Are there potential bargaining chips out there if there was a movement and an organization they could use?
There's all kinds. There are all kinds. I'll give you one example. What was the bargaining chip?
About 5 examples.
What was the bargaining chip in Montgomery during the Civil Rights Movement? Boycott. That's one of the primaries. A very good one. We can't get it organized where we need to, right? But if we were able to, right? A week of boycotting, not buying anything, nothing. Don't go to work, don't do anything. General strike is another. We was able to organize a general strike just on this question alone, right? It would shock this nation. It would shock people around the world. People around the world say, what's going on in the United States? Political prisoners, human rights. People ain't working. They ain't going to work, they ain't buying nothing, they ain't doing anything. General strike. You see what I'm saying? That's another. We're not there yet. We cannot even call for a day for a general strike. Now, however, you can get an individual, for instance, like Farrakhan, and he can organize people to march on Washington, D.C., get 1,000 or get 1 million people to march in Washington, or women in Philadelphia, 1 million women march, and get 1 million women to march in Philadelphia, all right? Now, if we was able to do that, get 1 million people to organize support of political prisoners, that's a bargaining chip. People are our greatest resource. People are our greatest resource, all right? So now if you're able to organize people to respond to particular ideas, goals, and objectives, you see what I'm saying? That's your greatest bargaining chip, people. So that's where we are lacking in terms of our movement. We have not organized people to respond to this particular issue as we should.
One of the things when we were in Puerto Rico that every single person we interviewed mentioned was when they found out that the church had gotten involved in the campaign to free them, that they knew that they were going to be getting out. What do you think about the church's involvement in a mass campaign?
Naturally, in terms of the black community across the country, the church has always been a significant representative on issues when they decide to become responsive to the needs of their community, to their congregation, to their constituency. All right. Unfortunately, and naturally, again, this example is the civil rights movement. You know, many of the individuals who are leaders in the civil rights movement were representatives of a particular denomination, a religious denomination. You know, Reverend Abernathy and Reverend King, and so forth and so on. So, the church or the clergy in general, they have a great deal of influence and are capable of seriously challenging the moral foundation of the social order, okay? So if we're able to raise the issue with the church or with the clergy on a moral level, it's a moral right that human rights be respected in the United States. You see what I'm saying? Then, you're able to challenge the conscience of the country.
Human rights on the agenda.
Yeah, and have human rights on it, and challenge the conscience of the country. But it has to be done that way. It has to be done on a question of moral. You have to raise it to a moral issue. You see? All right? They have to recognize it as a question of right and wrong. Is it right for the United States to keep these people in prison like this? For an action that was already determined to be unconstitutional by the FBI and Cointelpro. So it's a right to keep them in prison after all this period of time. And we say it's morally reprehensible.
If the Jericho movement decided that they were going to try to organize in the churches, how could they do that? How could they?
I mean, during the Jericho March, we had a couple of preachers to write letters and sermons and support. One of the reasons why we use the term Jericho because it's biblical. It comes from the story of Joshua, and when he surrounded the city of Jericho, and the people marched and raised a clamor, and the blowing of the trumpets, to issue a new day, a new time, okay? And the walls of Jericho came falling down. And basically what that means is that, we can interpret that as that we are raising the noise, raising the clamor, the issues of human rights until the wall of neglect and the lies of this not existing, is torn down. You know what I'm saying? So everybody will see, hey, political prisoners does exist in the United States. All right. And so that's, way that we can bring this matter into the church, into the clergies, and have them become responsive to it. Because there is an example that they can use as a political or a religious interpretation of this movement. We need to break down the walls of ignorance. We need to break down the walls of ignorance in regards to this particular issue. And if we can do that and shine light on this subject matter, then naturally we can win. We can win.
What do you think has been a difficulty in organizing or creating a mass campaign with the Jericho movement or the freeing of political prisoners? What makes it difficult to put this on a national agenda in terms of debate? What has been?
Two things. Lack of leadership and organizational development, right? I think that's a major problem, right? In terms of movement itself, you got to have an individual who has vision, okay? And I don't think that we have that. I think we have people who have the kind of vision to see how to create an organization and build the organization. Unfortunately, many people, or many individuals in these kind of situations depend upon someone who's charismatic, has a personality, all right, to be able to motivate people, to inspire people to function, right? And so that's a problem. And so leadership is one of the problems that we have. We need to develop the kind of leadership that are self-motivating, has vision, and able to inspire people to act, all right? And build the kind of organization that is of national representation, okay? The second thing is this. PPs and POWs need to be able to speak in their own voice. They're not being heard, okay? And we need to find ways to get inside these institutions and have them be heard, put a face and a voice to the movement, come from them, right? Let them tell their own stories. Because I think they have some powerful stories to tell, okay, in regards to their own lives. And I think if we're able to do that and put that forth, bring that out to the public, people will recognize, hey, they are real people, and yes, we need them out. You see what I'm saying? They have something to contribute to society at large. They're not, quote unquote, the common criminal. You see, they will not go out there and engage in kind of activities that harm the citizens or the citizenry. All right. So people got to know that the PPs and POWs are the kind of person that you want to live next door. That you want to be in your community. Okay. And the only way that can happen is that we have to put a face on them. We got to get our own voice out there. So those are the two things that I think that are very, very important. And also, naturally, we need to have the Jericho movement to continue to build internationally. I was trying to get, for instance, one of the Puerto Ricans who were just released from prison in Puerto Rico to establish a Jericho committee in Puerto Rico. Like we have one in Italy. We need to have one in Nigeria. We need to have one in Ghana. We need to have one in Brazil, in the Caribbeans, in Britain, and France, and Germany. We need to have Jericho committees all over the world. And if we can create that kind of international network, when the day comes, when we organize and we say that we want to call for that general strike, or we want to call for that day of protest, then it will be responsive all around the world. People will respond all around the world on this day. And it cannot be denied. The United States won't be able to deny it. Nowhere in the place in the world will be able to deny it. So that's where we need to go in terms of the movement. We need to be able to take this kind of information here and send it everywhere, and we need to ask people to establish Jericho committees all around the world, all across this country. And if we can create that kind of national, international network within 18 months to a year, 2 years time, if we should ask for or call for a demonstration of some kind, in front of U.S. embassies, United Nations, and so forth and so on, that happened at this particular date, it would be undeniable, and that is a possibility, a very, very real possibility, And I think at that time we might be able to win the release of a lot of people, and raise these issues. We got problems, man. We got problems in this country, and they need to be addressed, and we have to figure out ways, to address them. And it's not easy. It's a task. It's hard. And a lot of people don't want to believe. They want to accept the truth, man. They live their very comfortable lives. They go to work, they go home, they have the children, and then other people who suffer for whatever the reason they suffer for, it doesn't reach them, it doesn't touch them. So because it doesn't, they don't respond to it. We had to figure out some kind of way to make it touch them, make it reach them, you know, even if it's just on a moral level, you know, on the question of what's right and what's wrong. And if we can do it on that level alone, we win. We win.
I don't know if you were speaking on camera about the book that you were mentioning about the debt. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit.
I have not read the book. I'm trying to get, I need a copy of it.
But,
So I like to read it. But the issues of reparations.
yes. And Taruba has been, I've seen him speak about it
Yeah.
twice.
Yeah.
Talking about retributions.
Yeah.
And it's maybe one of the kind of bargaining chips I think they were talking about.
It can be if it's raised on to that level. I think it's well established that all around the world, when people have been repressed or in some ways enslaved, or some kind of way disenfranchised, that those individuals who are responsible for that kind of human rights violations had been made to repair the injury, the harm done. And in this instance, or in certain instances, that repair of the injury and the harm done was reparations, right? We know the Jews received reparations. We know the Inuits up in Alaska received reparations. We know that Native Americans continue to fight for what may be called reparations in terms of their own sovereignty and returns of the wealth that was taken from when they lost their lands in this country, which is extremely important, you know, issues that the United States needs to confront on a moral level, on a moral basis, dealing with Native Americans. So the same thing applies to Africans and chattel slavery in the United States. You know, how do we right the wrong? We know that in terms of the unequal distribution of wealth in this country, that the majority of those individuals who now in a position of power can historically trace their wealth back to chattel slavery, right? To African slavery in the United States. And so the question raised is, how do we rectify that particular error in terms of the history of this country, right? To right a particular wrong, all right? And so the question of reparations is important. And you know what? It's also important in terms of healing. Because in order for us to really deal with the situation, you have to recognize that there was a problem that needs to be resolved, all right? And particularly dealing with the consciousness of this country. And if you can deal with it on that level, and that there's a need to heal a very serious wound in this country, reparations may be a means in which to do so. You know what I'm saying? It may be the balm that assists in the healing process, okay? Why? Because then people have to become very conscious of the wrong that was done and how to repair it, all right? And it's gonna take some soul searching for all of Americans to deal with that issue. Serious soul searching. So, reparations can take many forms, all right? Or can be inclusive of many different ways to address it. And naturally, the releasing of political prisoners can be part of that process, all right? And I think it has to be inclusive in any discussion dealing with the question of reparations. You know? So I think that's one way that we can address it.
Was wanting to kind of change gears just a little bit.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you when you found out about Noah being sick and how you prepared for what was coming.
How to prepare for it. I was in the box. I was upstairs here. and Sophia came to visit me. And she said, yo. I said, what's up? She said, no, I got cancer. And it hurt. And then on April 28th, 29th or somewhere, no, it was April 30th, I got a phone call. I didn't get a phone call, but the chaplain called me into his office. And Asha called up here, sister, a friend of mine, Asha Mandela, she called up here. And she said, listen, I want you to hear before you hear from anybody else. And she said, Noah passed away April 28th. And I said, okay. And I went back to my cell and cried. Excuse me.
Okay, stop.
Right here. I should call me a crybaby. Yeah.
Sign of strength.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know, but you know, that's my comrade. You know what I mean? And we got busted together, we got arrested together. You know, he was hit, and I tried to cover him so he wouldn't get hit again. And you know, we got beat together, the whole bit, man. You know, it's hard to lose somebody that you was, you know, lifeline with, you know what I'm saying, life and death struggle with, you know what I'm saying? And not so much as losing him, but losing him that way. That's what hurts more than anything else, you know. You lost him on the battlefield, or you lost him, you know what I'm saying? You know, it's a loss, but listen, you know, he lost fighting, you see what I'm saying? But in a hospital bed in a prison, man,